Hello and welcome to the Hiring in Tech podcast. I'm Kalle, and with me I have William.
Hi there.
Today we are going to explore the recent EU transparency around salaries directive. So on the 30th of March, the EU Parliament accepted a new legislation which will be in the member states within 3 years. And this is about salary transparency in the union. So I'll quickly walk you through what this will mean for you as an employer. So it's really three things, starting with number one, which is including the salary range in your job advertisements. And when you have candidates now that apply to your job, you can't anymore ask them about their previous salaries. You will have to go with the salary that you set out in your job ad. The second thing about this new law will be that candidates have the right to ask what the average salary is for the position that you are hiring for. So this doesn't only, of course, apply to candidates, but also to your internal workers that already work at you. Your employees, they have the right to ask about the average salary for their position. Now, this isn't something new. William can tell something about what the US did in the start of this year.
Yes, so in the US, let's go more specific into, for instance, California. So in the beginning of this year, it became effective that if you're over 15 employees inside of our organization, you have to state in your job description your pay range. And if I remember correctly, it's something similar is coming to New York during this year. So it's not new. And of course, the EU legislation process, it's a long process. So everyone that has been a bit involved into this saw this coming. So now it's more like, okay, how do you do this? And especially for remote teams that hire people from, imagine India, Africa, Europe, US. So how will they do? They need to become more clear how they pay their employees. Now there has been also some debate about should you pay employees based on their location, or should you pay all employees the same? So that is another thing that people or the decision makers inside of these organizations need to be much more clear of.
Absolutely. And one question that many might have, like if the law comes into act in 3 years, should you already now start preparing for it? And my suggestion, and I think our suggestion, would probably be to do so right now. And why? Well, first of all, you will be prepared when the law comes so that you don't make any violations. But I think there's a much bigger benefit, which we have seen in the recent year from candidates, much more than ever before. And that is that candidates value salary transparency in the job ad as the number one or number two thing when they apply for new jobs. So having a transparent salary will make your job ads more attractive, will attract better talent from all around. But as William mentioned, when you hire remotely, you're a remote team, this can get more complicated. So William, what would you suggest that remote companies do about this?
Yeah, I'll give you an example of remote.com, what they did. I'm not sure if they do this right, like I'm going to tell you. So I'm not going to promise you anything. However, a couple of months ago, I bumped into something when remote.com published a public Notion handbook. I saw in the Notion handbook that they stated how they pay their internal employees. And remote.com has employees from all over the world. And, they have seen they have probably tried all kinds of models before. And what they concluded then is, for them at least, the best model is paying according to the cost of living where the employee lives. So they had developed a formula, something called GeoPay ranges. That is pretty much a discount. It's how big of a discount you should, get in your salary depending on where you live. So they benchmark the US. So let's say they're hiring a software engineer, a mid-level software engineer, full stack. So then they have a compensation provider or a provider that gives them compensation data. And based on that, they then see, okay, let's say that they are giving an offer to a person in Portugal. They then they have been created like this kind of discounts for how much they should pay the Portuguese engineer. And I don't remember exactly what the discount is, but let's say it's 25%. So what does this mean? If we say that the mid-software engineer in the US, average salary is $100,000 just for the sake of it. This means that they would pay the engineer in Portugal $75,000. And by being transparent about this, I believe that there aren't any big internal conflicts. Hey, why does, for instance, let's say that you speak with your team member that is on the other side of the world, and you then figure out that, hey, that team member makes 20,000 more for the same task. There aren't this kind of internal politics in the same way when you're public about this kind of, okay, how much do you pay depending on, or we pay this much depending on where you're located. So I believe that every company should already right now start, being more clear, write down on a piece of paper, okay, if you're a remote company, how much should I pay someone that is located in, let's say, Kenya or India, Australia, US, wherever? Because then it's, first of all, it will be much easier to attract talent, as Kalle mentioned already, by being public about this. But second of all, at the same time also, since within 3 years, this directive will be effective in your own country if you live in one of the EU countries. So then you need, by latest, then have this mapped out. So I would say that, concrete measure is, I believe the best model personally is, in my opinion, is to pay people based on where they live, and then have this kind of discounts that pay people based on the cost of living in that country.
Yes, absolutely. It's a great resource, and everyone should check that out and benchmark salaries to your own country and have that public. That's the first thing you should do. And I think if we look at the law from a bit of a broader perspective, is this good? Is it bad? Like for the employer, for the employees? I think once everyone has to do it, it will be the standard. Everyone's job as will have the salaries. I think it will actually save a ton of time on both the candidate side and the employer side. Because no longer will you have to go to the third or fourth interview before you realize that the salary isn't a match. And no longer will you have to have an employee that's been on the company for 1 year and you pay them significantly less than the other employees in the company just because you don't have to show what you pay. And they get an offer from another firm, and the other firm snatches the employee from you just because you weren't transparent with the salary. And you didn't know what the other firm was paying either. So having transparency in the salary, I think that will make the market even more competitive for the good talent and also for the good companies. Do you agree with that? I think you're muted.
Great. Thank you, Kalle. No, I was going to say definitely. Quickly touching upon the how much you should pay people based on where they live. Of course, that is a reason why, after thinking a bit more deeply into that one, I believe why you should already now start thinking about this question is because there are no right or wrong answers. And it takes a lot of time, figuring this stuff out. Like, okay, how much should you pay someone? Because, it depends a lot about, everything. Okay, how much does it cost to live? How much is rent in a specific place? How much are, everything with groceries, etc., etc. So I believe this is something, a model that you can't, come up with in one day or even 1 week. That this is something that you have, to research a bit deeper into. Ask, other companies, that how are they doing it? Ask your friends that are working at other companies, how are they doing this? That there aren't, any in the future, that there aren't any questions like, okay, hey, why are you, for instance, paying me 70, giving me a 30%, or why are you paying me 70% of what they pay in the US? And then, the employee gives you some data about their cost of living, and then you have calculated it wrong. So there is, of course, always that risk. And that is why I believe that you should, start early before it's mandatory to make this public.
Absolutely. Now, one more aspect of this law, which we haven't yet touched upon, is the gender neutral pay. So if your company doesn't comply with having a gender neutral pay, especially if you are over 100 employees and have to formally report about it, you will be fined. And this is something that we have never seen before in the EU on this level. So take this into account, especially if you're a bigger company, that if you find in your salaries, you might not have done this calculation yet, but if you find that you pay men or women in your company more on average, this is something that you will have to look into, and you will have to be able to objectively measure the role, the seniority, and back it up on why you pay more, for example, to one gender if it's the same role. And that's something that you should start correcting already now before it's too late.
Yeah, definitely. And yeah, I believe that was pretty much it, at least from my side. Perhaps let's wrap this up. Kalle, could you give a short summary to everyone what we spoke about?
Absolutely. So 3 things that you will have to keep in mind with the new EU law that will be active in 3 years. The legislation passed the EU Parliament March 30th. 3 things you have to come up. Remember, you will have to include the salary transparency in job ads. You will not be able to ask the candidate about their previous salary. The second thing, all the candidates and the current employees have the right to ask about the average salary for the position, and you will have to comply with that. And the third one is formal reporting for companies with over 100 employees on how they pay based on genders, and trying to make that gap very small. And from what we spoke about how you pay remotely. Benchmarking your salary in one country to the other countries could be a great solution for your company, and giving discounts or premiums based on the cost of living. And in addition, we also quickly spoke about how much time we think this will save, not having to go to the 3rd or 4th interview round before realizing there's not a match. So the best thing you can do for your company today is start to implement this before it becomes a law. And I think that's all for this podcast. Thank you all for listening.
Thank you.